What are some reasons that you got into playing your sport? If you're like most athletes that I talk to, it's because you found your sport to be one of the most fun, rewarding things you could spend your time doing. Yet many, if not most athletes, eventually lose sight of this original, important reason they spend so many hours training and competing, leading to more stress, less enjoyment, and overall playing below their potential. Welcome to the Sports Psychology of. Today, we're talking about the sports psychology of fun. There's no question athletes lose sight of having fun as they progress through their sport. This could be for many reasons, like becoming too competitive, putting unreasonably high expectations on yourself, or a coach sucked the fun out of the sport in one dreadful season. How can athletes maintain having fun throughout a season and career while staying competitive and playing near their potential? Will having more fun make you a more complacent athlete? How can athletes learn to embody healthy competitiveness where high stakes and challenges don't suck the joy out of their sport? Today, I'm joined by Aaron Goldman, who is a certified mental performance consultant based out of Oregon and is the director of Play Free. A former high school and college athlete and longtime youth coach, Aaron collaborates directly with athletes on the development of mental and emotional life skills that help them thrive on and off the field. He also works together with coaches, parents, and program organizers to create safe, supportive, joyful, and developmentally appropriate competitive spaces. Timestamps are in the description. Enjoy. I'm curious, before we get into all the good stuff here, where does your love or appreciation for the mental game come from?
Comes from my own struggles as an athlete when I was coming up playing sports and just not having the skills to manage my own emotions, to manage my stress, to cope in healthy ways. It held me back as a player. It made me sort of miserable to be around on the court, I think, in retrospect. And then I had 15 years of coaching youth sport and seeing that same lack of skill, lack of focus on culture, lack of health in sporting environments in the teams that I was coaching and other teams that we were playing against. And so I got really curious about how to change that, how to become a resource, become an advocate, and be sort of an agent of change in that world.
I think a lot of mental performance consultants have a similar story where they did not have the skills and then they learned the skills to have a better mindset in sports. And they go, okay, everybody needs to know about these.
Yeah, we teach what we need to learn, right? So I of course didn't have anyone like me or you available to me when I was coming up as an athlete, and so I kind of just struggled through
Yeah.
and didn't do a great job of it, truthfully. And so of course, right, we experience a lack of something, and if we're curious enough about it and we see enough of a need, we gravitate towards it. So I gravitated towards the mental side of it. Also, the old adage of those who can't do anymore teach.
Yeah.
So when my playing career ended, I wanted to stay involved in sport. And I love working with athletes. It's a world that I understand, it's a world that I can relate to, it's a world that I'm fascinated by and inspired by. And so that was another thing that kind of kept me going and pushed me to kind of make a shift towards the mental and emotional side of it.
I couldn't agree more. I love working with this population. It's so fun, so fascinating. Let's get into the good stuff here. So we're
All right.
talking about fun. Let's first kind of clear up what we mean by fun. So the first thing we're going to talk about is there are two different types of fun. So type 1, type 2. Do you want to start us off there?
Sure. Type 1 fun is the easy, low pressure, really focused on just kind of being in the moment, and the reward is that it's enjoyable. when I think of type 1 fun, I think of ease. I think of sort of fewer rules. I think of low pressure, right? Sort of roll a ball out and you see kinder soccer and kids are just kind of running all over the place, kicking a ball around. And it's fun for what it is. So that's type 1. And I'm sure there's a technical definition of type 1 fun that we're not touching on.
Hmm.
I'm just telling you what I think of. Type 2 fun is climbing a mountain and it's a struggle and there's a target and it's a real challenge to get there and the reward is in the accomplishment. It's not always fun in the moment to climb the mountain. It's really demanding, it's exhausting, it pushes you in terms of having to be courageous, in terms of having to take chances, in terms of having to push beyond your comfort zone. But there's a goal, and when you reach the mountaintop or you reach wherever you're going on that mountain, you look back and you say, that was fun, not because it was fun in the moment, but because of what you achieved through that struggle.
Yeah, type 2 really hinges on this sense of accomplishment through effort and skill,
Right.
and often involves adversity and struggle. Whereas type 1 fun, it's a lot easier to have that fun in the moment, but you're not looking back on it in weeks, months, and years and still thinking about how much fun it was. Two examples I think of are a pickup game where score is maybe being tracked, maybe not, and then an intense competitive game between a rival. So that pickup game is type 1 fun. It's relatively easy, low stakes, no pressure. And then that really intense rivalry matchup is type 2 fun, where it's a struggle. You're going to probably face some adversity, but should you come out the other side with a win, you're looking back on that with a lot of fun and really
Unless you're like
appreciate
I
the
was and you treat every pickup game like a championship game, in which
oh
case
no.
everything is type 2 fun. Now you see why I got into sports psychology.
Which is maybe even ironic that we're talking about fun. Do you have trouble having fun when it's a really casual like pickup?
Not anymore.
Okay. Okay, yeah, you used to be like this and then you learned
Yeah.
what you're going to be talking about to reel yourself in. Got it.
Mhm.
Actually, that's a great transition into this next topic. How does fun change for athletes as they age?
I think one of the things that changes fundamentally is the environment that we're in. So, I mentioned kinder soccer, and I work with a youth soccer club, and we have kids from age 6 all the way up to U19 in our club. We have recreational, we have an academy level, we have premier level, and so I get to sort of see how it changes as the kids age up. And I think when we're young, the most important thing, because young kids don't have the brain development and the cognitive capacity to think much past where they are in that moment. So type 1 fun is really important because that's where they are and that's the level that they're at in terms of what they're able to think about. And so it's more about continually creating a fun environment that they can step into and enjoy moment to moment to moment.
It's a good
Because
point.
the concept of type 2 fun doesn't compute for that young brain. There is no understanding of input and output, cause and effect. What I do now has an effect on what happens to me in the future. That kind of executive functioning just doesn't exist for those kids. So crafting an environment at that level really needs to be focused on keeping things enjoyable in the moment.
And I don't imagine there's many 7-year-olds running a marathon with all that struggle and then looking back on it, looking,
Yeah,
oh
not
man,
not
so
many.
accomplished.
I mean, they're doing it. If there's a 7-year old out there running a marathon, good on you for doing that. But I'd be curious to know why they're doing it. They're running
Yeah.
with their parent. They're some kind of prodigy, right? But those are, to me, those are the exceptions that prove the rule.
Mhm. When I think of how fun changes as an athlete ages, I imagine they might end up being more focused on the social connection that is involved within their sport. So they very much value having friends on the team, becoming friends with their teammates. But I can also imagine when an athlete gets very motivated for these high goals of being an Olympian or just a professional in their sport, they might find winning and success more fun than they did as a kid because they know that's getting them closer to their goal. So I imagine this fun, there is no blueprint for how fun changes as you age. It's going to be a lot different. And I'm sure, like you said, based on the environment, that's going to be a big factor.
Yeah, and as my graduate school advisor would say, it depends. It depends on the kid's psychological makeup. It depends on their background. It depends on their home environment. It depends on the environment of the team, within the club, within the community, within the country that they're in. Depends on the sport. Right? Like
Yeah.
there's so many factors. It's one of the things that I love about psychology. Uh, it's less empirical because it's so much based on anecdote and personal experience. And there's 8 billion people on earth, and that means there's 8 billion slightly different ways of being in the world. So as kids get older though, part of what happens is their brain starts to develop and their cognition sort of levels up as they go. And so we as coaches and crafters of youth sport environments can then introduce ideas like competition and winning. And a lot of the that drive to win that you're describing actually comes from adults, comes from the media, it comes from what we see. And right, this time is very fraught with all kinds of expectations, and that's a whole nother conversation. But one thing that happens is the adults start to change the environment for the kids.
And there comes a time when that kid is very aware of that environment. So, for example, when parents are giving so much praise to the kid who's scoring the most goals or talking very highly of the pro athletes. So then this kid starts to realize, oh, now I'm having goals that are maybe taking away from the fun.
Yeah, especially if the goals are unrealistic. Like you're not like, you hear professional athletes sometimes talk about, I always wanted to do this. That's one model, and that works for some kids in some sports. But you also have the Roger Federer model, which is like, I didn't even really start being serious about tennis until I was 17. He played soccer and he did other stuff. And I think that in turn, like if I had to say, here's a healthier way to do it, it would be that. You want kids to have range, you want them to have diverse interests, you want to keep it moving. Like I work with coaches, and one of the hardest things for coaches, especially as the level of competition goes up, is to keep the emphasis on the process. And so type 2 fun as athletes get older becomes about the process and the little moments of joy within what can sometimes be a struggle that keep us going, understanding that there's meaning behind what we're doing. And as kids get older, right? I mean, you mentioned this a minute ago. The social component for young kids is huge. You ask kids why, like, why do you do this? Why did you get into it? Why do you love it? I ask kids those questions always. That's my first question when I'm working with an individual athlete, when I'm working with a team. My first question is why, fill in the blank. Why soccer? Why basketball? Why volleyball? Why tennis? Why whatever?
Yeah.
And a good portion of them will say that they got into it because their friends were doing it, because they wanted to be with their friends. They wanted to have fun. They wanted to run around. They wanted to use their bodies. But the social component is huge.
Hmm.
One of the things a mistake that we make is we stop emphasizing the base social needs as kids get older. We talk about team building. We talk about shared purpose, which of course, is important. And we'll talk about that later. But I think something that we have to also keep in mind is that this is an important environment inside of which social skills are built.
Mm-hmm.
And winning and the focus on winning can take away from our ability to focus on what's really important. Because it's great, everybody wants to be a professional athlete. Like all young athletes, not all, but a lot of young athletes, you ask them, you know, what do you want to be when you grow up? And like me, I grew up, I was a Boston Celtics fan. I was born there, and my parents had season tickets to the Celtics when I was a kid. And if you asked me what I wanted to be when I grew up, I would have said Larry Bird. First of all, there's only one Larry Bird, but the number of kids who actually end up playing professional sports is so small as to be sort of an insignificant number.
So you're saying it's dangerous to entertain every kid's dream of being a professional athlete because that would entail minimizing the fun in a lot of areas for an
I think it's
unrealistic goal.
yeah, I think it's okay for kids to want to do that. I just think as adults we have to understand that the goal, like everybody has the same goals. Everybody wants to win. Winners want to win, losers want to win. So it's obviously not the goal that makes the difference in getting there. It's the process of building the skills and crafting the environment and creating the habits that will help us build through all of the steps in order to maybe get there someday. And for most of us, probably not.
Mm-hmm. And crafting that environment to also facilitate fun as well as skill acquisition
Yeah,
can mitigate the stress and anxiety a lot of athletes feel when things might not be going their way because there is still a component of fun that is involved. It's not just all about the outcome.
for sure. And we put such a high premium on skill development, especially as athletes get older. Like sometimes you just got to roll the ball out there. I work with college teams, and you can see when the athletes are not having fun. And so, my advice to coaches, and sometimes I'll even say this if it feels like the right moment, is like today they just need to play. Like they need to reconnect with that why of doing something for the intrinsic joy, for the intrinsic pleasure, the intrinsic fun of just going out and playing your game without someone always trying to teach you something or without somebody always in your ear about how you can get better. We learn by doing. I learn by doing the work, not by, of course I read books and I read studies and I'm trying to stay up on research, but that information isn't useful unless I can just go put it into practice. And so part of crafting a fun sport environment is giving kids, young adults, adult athletes a chance to just go put that stuff into practice and kind of work it out.
Yeah.
That process of discovery is really important. So, we're talking about fun, of course. I guess what I think of as fun is more what we've been talking about as type 1 fun.
Yeah.
And what I think of as joy and meaning and purpose and intention is more of that type 2 type of activity.
It's like when you can look ahead to speculate on the gains you're making, the progress towards your goals by focusing on the process in this practice. And while it might not be instant gratification in the moment, you're 1% closer to fulfilling your potential, which can facilitate a lot of joy and that meaning that you were alluding to.
Yeah. And then because you have that foundation of joy and understanding and that sense of progress, then when you go out to practice or just to play, you're more likely to have fun doing it because you know that it's taking you somewhere. So then you're less worried. And as you said, your stress level's lower. You're more likely to just let go and go do your thing and not be so worried about, is this getting me where I want to go?
Mm-hmm.
That makes
Can
sense?
be, yeah, it can be a bit looser and
Yeah.
not so rigid, analyzing everything that you're doing.
Yeah. Which then, of course, makes it more likely that we're going to have fun because those of us, myself included, who were horrible overthinkers and horribly self critical about everything, both in the moment and afterwards, the ability to loosen up a little bit
Mm-hmm.
is really important. But it's not enough for you or me or a coach or a parent to just say, you need to loosen up. Like, yeah, okay, obviously, but how?
Mm-hmm.
And I would argue that working intentionally to cultivate meaning, to reflect on my successes, to reflect on my process, to check in with myself and be really honest about where I'm at, gives me the ability to loosen up a little bit because with more information comes a decreased stress level
Yeah.
because then I can decide what I'm going to do with that and use it to drive the process.
We're going to get to more action items that you can do to facilitate more fun for either yourself or your athletes or your kids. However, before that, I think it's important to go over some concrete benefits to having fun. So, how fun can benefit performance and longevity, but also talk about how fun might hurt performance and limit your potential. But before all of that, Aaron, I'd like to just talk briefly about this relationship between having fun and that cultivation of meaning and joy, and why those are more important than just having this type one kind of fun all the time.
Yeah, I think that sports are hard. Playing a sport is hard. Dedicating yourself to playing a sport is hard. And we look at it and like especially with professional athletes, we have this tendency to say, well, what are you complaining about? You play a game for a living. It's very dehumanizing to look at things that way because athletes, sure, they're athletes, but they're human beings first. I'm a person who plays a sport. I'm not my sport. And so everyone has their reason for doing it, and you need that reason if you're going to take it as far as you can take it. For some people, that's all the way to the top. For most people, it's not. It's an avenue to fitness, it's an avenue to social connection, it's an avenue to competitive expression. It's a way to keep your body moving, it's a way to stay grounded, it's a way to be in the moment. So, without having an intrinsic purpose and meaning, we lose access to all of that. Because if I'm just doing it, like you see this, and I work a lot with kids, so kids are sort of my first reference, but you start to see the kids who are only doing it because their parents want them to do it. They disengage. They show up, they're unhappy. They're emotionally fragile, or they're checked out, or they're mean, or they just don't, they're not locked in because they don't care because the purpose isn't theirs.
Mm-hmm.
And although our parents, for most of us, are a strong influence and a strong driving force, when it comes to me doing something hard, I have to be the driver of that.
Yeah.
No one's going to do it for me. No one is going to just help. No one's going to reach inside me and flip a switch and all of a sudden I'm going to be locked in. if I don't care intrinsically, deeply about the thing that I'm doing. In which case, it's not going to be fun for me.
Mhm.
So that connection, I think that especially as we get older and we begin more and more, not just in sports, but in our lives, in our work, in our relationships, in our families, in our communities, as we begin to engage more and more in those types of purpose driven activities that we don't really always get to like experience the reward of until the end. It's only fun if we are connected to it.
And I imagine so these athletes won't feel connected as much when they get into it for winning or because of external factors like parent status. So you're saying when they go in with more of a I'm doing this for my own joy, finding connections, my stress outlet to become fit, that's a more that can facilitate fun in the process.
Well, I think it facilitates fun and it facilitates stable motivation
Yeah.
because, of course, winning is a motivator. Of course, what unfortunately can be portrayed as a transactional relationship between my activity and my parents' approval is a strong motivator. They are, but they're not stable.
Yeah.
They're not dynamic. Those are brittle motivators. They're
Mm-hmm.
very fixed mindset type
Yeah.
motivators. Because there's with winning, like winning is the most fixed mindset outcome of all because you either win or you don't. And really the process of putting yourself in a position to win is very gray area. Like there's no black and white. Sports are not, they're not linear, they're not binary, they're not black and white. It's like everything exists on a spectrum
Mm-hmm.
in terms of how am I going to get from where I am to where I want to be. Right? I mean, you probably remember this from studying motivation. Motivation exists on a spectrum from totally extrinsic to totally intrinsic. And most of us are somewhere in between. And we are in different places on the motivational spectrum based on the activity that we're in.
Yeah.
How connected do I feel to it? What's my reason for doing it? There's joy in having my own reason for doing it. Intrinsic, not dependent on someone else's validation. What's the meaning? My why,
Mm-hmm.
right? Then I can experience joy in the process, which allows me to have fun.
Have you seen a lot of maybe kids or teens, young adults talk about that they started this sport for something like fun, connection, but then it turns into something else? And that is what saps the joy.
For sure. It happens a lot. I don't know how up to date this statistic is, but one of the like very troubling stats that you learn in studying sports psych and youth development is that 70% of kids drop out of sport before the age of 13. I would like to see an updated number that accounts for the last 3 years
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
because COVID has changed a lot in terms of the youth sport environment and education and just development in general. But yes, in fact, a lot of the most stressed out athletes that I talk to have lost sight of that original driving force,
Mm-hmm.
or it's
And
buried.
and they need these reminders and reconnect with the meaning to
Yeah,
find it's not just about doing things that bring fun in the moment. It's about reconnecting with this deeper sense of purpose this that will bring more joy throughout the process
yeah,
of being an athlete.
yeah. The way I think about it is you have this thing that starts out as a simple source of fun, and then it becomes a dream, and then the dream becomes a goal.
Yeah.
And then somewhere along the way, if we take it far enough, the goal becomes a job.
Yep, there it is.
And then the job becomes a chore.
By this point, you have lost that connection to what got you in to this in the first place.
Absolutely.
Mhm.
Somewhere between goal and chore, a lot of athletes lose their connection to their original purpose for doing it.
And it makes sense because they get very invested. It means a lot to them, and that's when they start to be a lot more tense when things aren't going well. That's how people lose the fun because this goal that they start connecting with becomes very important. That the stakes become higher in these big matches, and that drives fun down.
Yeah. It's not just stakes for them either. It's stakes for their family, it's stakes for their
Yeah.
loved ones, it's stakes for their friends and their community.
Yep.
The higher you go, the more people are involved who are sort of
On your team.
depending on you,
Yeah.
is what it feels like. And so that adds pressure. And so, am I allowed to just go out and have sort of simple fun doing my thing when there's all these people who are counting on me? See what I mean?
Yeah.
It gets really tricky.
Mhm. Let's talk about how having fun and maybe reconnecting with your meaning to facilitate more fun and joy, how that can impact goal achievement and performance.
Yeah.
Where my mind goes immediately is the happy, healthy competitor is going to be better than the one who is very stressed out and burnt out. And part of this formula is that when an athlete is having some baseline amount of fun compared to another athlete who is not finding any joy in this process, they are going to experience less stress, less anxiety, which is going to mitigate the effects of the stress response, which a lot of athletes experience in overdrive. And how this comes out is they have increased muscle tension, so they might not be as accurate, which can also lead to more injuries. There's going to be more overthinking in the stressed out athletes, and the athletes who are having fun are going to be showing up to practices much more often than the ones who experience stress at the thought of every practice. So I think though there's a lot of benefits that we can touch on in how fun facilitates performance. What jumps out to you in this basically selling the concept of fun to athletes?
Yeah. The first thing that I have to remember and that I try to remind athletes of is that our body only has one response system to stress. So the sympathetic nervous system just does its thing. So all those effects that you're describing, which also include elevated heart rate, they include uh, a slowing of deep internal processes like digestion because blood is moving out towards the muscles. We have fast twitch activation. All of that stuff happens whether we're riding a roller coaster, as you said, or whether I'm about to get eaten by a bear. So the interpretation of the stressor doesn't come from our central nervous system. So I could view that stressor as a threat, which the bear is, but the roller coaster is probably not. Or I could view it as an opportunity, which is how we then sort of get the butterflies in our tummy to fly in formation. So I think that interpretation is really key to managing stress.
So being able to find the joy or fun in stressful environments and situations can manage that stress response, which a lot of people want to feel less of before and during games.
Yes. And of course, I want to point out here that we are talking about people who have a within reason healthy autonomic nervous system.
Yeah.
People who have experienced trauma, people who are struggling with post-traumatic stress, people who are under chronic stress, the system doesn't respond the same way. And it's not a healthy, functioning parasympathetic sympathetic balance. And those people have sort of lost that homeostasis, of course, through no fault of their own. And so when we're talking about changing the interpretation of stress, that is something that is part of treatment for PTSD. But in an athletic context, I just want to make it really clear to people who are listening that when I say how you deal with stress is up to your interpretation of the stressor, I'm not talking about post traumatic, like really seriously dysregulated
Mhm.
stress response systems.
It sounds like a good opportunity to delineate between what we do, mental performance, and mental health professionals who are licensed. So,
Absolutely.
so yeah, we are talking about the context of people who have the jitters, pregame jitters, maybe performance anxiety, where it's not generalized anxiety disorder, but
Mhm.
just performance related. That's where these tools are going to come in handy.
Yeah. And often people who have experienced trauma, whether they were adverse childhood experiences when they were young or whether they experienced chronic stress in their home or their work or their community, these are still tactics that are part of that larger treatment plan.
Yeah.
There just is a clinical element to it, and that's not what we're talking about.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, in a sport context, I'm getting ready for a big game. My body's response to that is going to be the same. So, am I nervous because I'm afraid I'm going to fail, or is my system just priming itself for competition?
Mm-hmm.
Because the fight or flight is just the fight or flight. So, if I'm going to run away, if I'm going to hightail it out of the gym, I need my muscles to work. But if I'm going to go out there and play and compete, I need my muscles to work. So, what I do about the response and how I interpret and channel the response goes a long way to determining whether I'm going to go out there and have a chance at performing, whether my performance is going to be relatively sustainable over time, and therefore whether I'm going to be able to have fun doing it. It's not going to be fun all the time, is the thing.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Like sometimes it's hard, sometimes it's unpleasant, sometimes I have to do things I don't want to do. That's part of training. That's part of that deeper meaning that allows me to do those things that I don't always enjoy in the moment in service of achieving something larger.
Changing the interpretation is huge.
Changing the interpretation is huge. And eventually, like, it's a process because I start out by just having this response. Then, hopefully, I'm one of these slightly dysregulated athletes who has access to a sports psychologist or a mental performance coach. That person helps me understand how to recognize
Yeah.
my response,
Awareness.
how to feel it,
Mm-hmm.
how to notice it, how to be aware of it. Then, once I become aware of it after the fact, the next step is to be able to notice it while it's happening, which requires some mindfulness. It requires me to be able to breathe and find that space between stimulus and response where I can say, wow, look at what's happening to me right now. Here's that thing showing up.
Because if you don't catch it in that moment, it's going to do its own thing, which is probably not good because, like you said, that sympathetic nervous system is going to do its job, which is outdated and not what we want. So we want to try and manage it, which requires awareness in the moment.
Yeah. Yeah. And so if I can recognize that, then the next step is to be able to have skills that will steer it before it goes in that direction,
Yeah.
so that I can prepare myself for what I know is coming, for the adversity, for the challenge, for the stress response that I know is coming, because that's what my body does.
Hmm.
And I can put it in a place that is useful to me. So you see athletes doing little meditation exercises before a game, before a competition. You see them visualizing. That's all part of that process of channeling the sympathetic response into something productive, channeling it into performance, channeling it into focus.
To get a good example of how other mental skills facilitate other mental skills or qualities. So how
Yeah,
meditation can facilitate fun in this
yeah,
upcoming game.
yeah. Awareness. Kobe Bryant said, everything starts with awareness.
Yep.
We have to be able to pay attention. And I think that if I had to choose one thing to work on with every athlete, and that could be the only thing that I could work on, it would be awareness. Paying attention to what is right now.
What about how I imagine a lot of athletes, parents, coaches listening are wondering how fun can limit potential and hurt performance. And I think there's a real case to be made there. So I was hoping we can spend some time to play devil's advocate here and talk about how fun, especially in an excessive capacity, how that can hurt performance and limit potential. Where does your mind immediately go in that with that question?
Um, I think about, I talked about this thing about sometimes you just got to roll the ball out and let them play. Well, if you're just doing that, then there's no skill development and there's no intentional teaching of social and emotional skills. There's no crafted opportunities to solve problems and to resolve conflict and to express competitiveness in a healthy way. Like, that's why coaches exist. And so, too much fun. Yeah, I mean, of course, there's such a thing as too much fun, especially if it exists in like an unhealthy context.
So one example of too much fun that I think of is players goofing around during practice, especially when coaches explaining a drill. What can you do about something like that where you don't want to sap all the joy and fun from these kids in practice, but that is a clear example of how they are not going to get as much out of practice because they're having too much fun? What would you say to coaches and parents that see that?
The first thing, especially if I'm working with young kids and teenagers, is that I encourage coaches to keep it very short and very to the point. The kids don't have an attention span.
Yeah.
So if you're explaining a drill, it's got to be, here's how you do it. Here's why we're doing it. Let's go do it. Because they're not there to stand and listen to you talk. And I, as someone who has a tendency to expound on things, I have to really remind myself to keep it short. Like, I did a workshop with a team yesterday, and it was like 8 minutes too long
Yeah.
because you could see it happen. The kids just lost focus.
Hmm.
They're 12 and 13-year-old boys, of course. Like, the fact that I got them to pay attention for the first 32 minutes of the thing was a miracle. So keep it short, keep it to the point, be very clear, and be very clear about your expectations, because kids are always going to find a way to goof off. They just will. They don't, the ability to make yourself pay attention when you don't want to pay attention doesn't come until later. Like, that part of their brain literally doesn't exist. And so the process of brain structure and cognitive development is something that I think coaches need to understand better. So that's part of what I do, is I try to provide that education to the clubs that I work with so that they can understand the context inside of which these kids aren't paying attention. And then we have to tailor what we do to where they are, not what we're trying to get across.
And even older athletes, I mean, everybody has this in their brain where it is a resource to pay attention, especially when you might not want to pay attention or you're distracted. That takes energy, and that isn't unlimited throughout a day. We lose the ability to do that and sustain focus.
Mm-hmm.
So coaches understanding that they can reduce the chances for their players becoming distracted and being tempted to goof off by understanding that about the brain.
Yeah, and if you are the coach of especially a youth team, but certainly a college team, any team, and your practices are at the end of the day when they've had to deal with their morning routine with their family, whatever that looks like, then they've been in school all day, expending those, I call them finite personal resources, attention, energy, willpower, empathy, right? The things that we get to the end of the day and we're like, wow, I'm just burnt. I don't have anything left. I need to recharge. Those are the things that we're recharging. So if you're like, we have some teams that practice from 7 to 9 p.m.
Yeah.
And these are high school kids. And so they've just spent the entire day utilizing those resources in very dynamic, very fast changing, very demanding environments. And then they get out there and we expect them to pay attention while we're talking about stuff. They don't really have a lot left. So we have to make sure that the environment that we are creating is something that they look forward to at the end of their already long day.
Yeah.
And that's where joy comes in, and that's where making it fun comes in within reason. Um, you know, kids are going to be kids. And so we also have to make sure that our expectations are in line with what they're capable of, especially after 3 years, basically 2 years of stalled social, emotional, and psychological development.
Yeah.
You see it differently with different groups of kids. But like we have this group that I did a workshop with last night. I've spent a lot of time talking to the coach about why does it seem like this group is so far behind? Well, it's because they were firmly in we're still kids when COVID hit. And that stretch between 9, 10, and 12 and 13 is when a lot of that kind of social development and maturity and puberty all happens. And some of that, even puberty and these more internal hormonal processes are driven by the environment that we're in, driven by the demands of the environment. And so we stalled all of that. And so these kids are very young developmentally, which means that their attention span is even shorter than it might otherwise be at 13 years old. So we also have to account for that. And we're really not educationally, we're not accounting for that loss in growth, that stalled development. Kids are behind. Kids who were already out of that little kid phase by the time COVID hit are not as behind, right? It's more their deficits are academic.
Mm-hmm.
The older the students get, the more it starts to show up academically. But still, kids are lacking social and emotional skills, and so cultivating environments where they have stability and where they can show up and be themselves and learn, that has to be done intentionally.
Can an athlete who is maybe overly focused on having fun in their sport experience a dip in motivation or burnout when they encounter setbacks and obstacles and adversity because they aren't focused on, they don't care as much about the results as much as they just want to have fun? So maybe they're more likely to kind of give up on a sport because they're not having fun anymore.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, I think if they're just out there to have fun, I mean, right? That's why it's important to have different levels of sport. Like we have recreational soccer for the kids who are not interested in playing super competitive premier travel soccer.
Hmm.
So we just have to make sure that there are places for kids with different reasons, different motivations, different desires to be able to participate. But yes, if you have a kid who's playing a sport and they're really just in it for fun to run around, and then it starts getting more competitive and the demand starts getting higher and they run into adversity, do they really have a reason to keep doing it in that context? Maybe not.
What if a parent like wants them to grow as a person and they understand that sports is such a great vessel for that growth, and they want to keep pushing their kid of like, hey, I know this new league that you're in because you aged out is tougher and it's not as fun, but we want you to stay with it. I'm sure there's, I guess we could easily talk about how each dynamic, each family is unique and they could kind of analyze it for themselves. But I imagine a lot of kids might instinctively say, I want to stop or quit, when maybe it would be better for them, even though the fun isn't there as much. Maybe this is them learning what type 2 fun is.
Yeah, I would argue, or I would tell that parent that sport is not the only incubator for learning those skills.
So like maybe acting, playing an instrument, performing that
Yeah.
way, a lot of other stuff.
Anything that requires us to stretch ourselves, anything that requires us to push the edge of our comfort zone, anything that requires us to uh, develop social, emotional, motivational skills is going to teach that stuff. The way that I think about sport is only important because the people involved feel connected to it. And what sport we're involved in is only important because of our shared love of it. But soccer is not a better environment or worse environment for learning any of that stuff than is hockey or swimming or water polo or baseball, because it's the skills are available, the teachable moments are available, and none of those things are better or worse than playing music or making art or being in the performing arts in theater. The opportunities to learn all of this stuff exist in everything.
Mm-hmm.
And you and I just happen to come from a sport background, and so here we are sitting talking about sports, but it doesn't have to be sports. So I would encourage those parents to ask their kids what they are into.
Yeah. Especially if they're not into the sport they're playing. What
Yeah.
else do they have an interest in, something else that they would want to switch to do?
Yeah. And especially if that sport is the sport that that parent played,
Yeah.
that's the sport that they were passionate about, that's the sport that they feel connected to. Is your kid playing because they want to play, or are they playing because you want them to play, or because you wish you could still play?
What about this? Let's say there is a kid who got into a sport because they just loved it. They had friends in it, they liked getting better, and then they hit a certain point, maybe a couple of years in, and they're not experiencing the same joy that they were. But I imagine a lot of athletes will have that dip in fun and joy, and then it comes back through maybe skill acquisition because they had a new coach, a better team that they were a part of. So I'm just trying to picture when it might not be the right move to just quit and change sports or performance domains because you are experiencing that lack of joy. So, um, any advice to maybe someone who what would want to, does it make sense for someone to stay in the sport even though they are experiencing a lack of joy, because maybe it will come back?
It does. And that's a very different thing. right? The thing that we just were talking about before is not the same as they still love the sport and they still want to play and they're still connected to it and they've hit a speed bump.
Got it.
Because, right? I mean, you and I can sit here and talk about it and we're like, yeah, that makes sense. The difference is there's still an intrinsic driving force for them because they love the sport. They love being out there. There certainly are times when it becomes not worth it. I had an athlete that I was working with, and he loved the sport, but it made him miserable.
Hmm.
And sport provides opportunity, but the opportunity is neutral. There's lots of positive things that we can take away, but it also brings out the worst in us. Basketball brought out the worst in me often. It also provided opportunities for me to be at my best. So when we hit those speed bumps and when we hit those moments of challenge and adversity, I think it's good to take a little bit of time away, take a week, and do something else, or take time to reflect. Notice how you feel being away from it. Wait until you miss it
Hmm.
to come back. Right? I mean, we're in this very rush culture where if you're not doing the thing all the time, you're falling behind and you're
Yeah.
never going to make it. It's just not true. Especially if by engaging in that process of grind, you're making yourself miserable and you push yourself to burnout because there is a point past which you have to walk away. That's burnout. That's when kids, excuse me, are not doing it because they love it or their love for it isn't enough to overcome the distress or enough to guide them through the distress.
I think it's so powerful when you aren't having that same fire for your sport, that same passion to walk away. And something I want to talk about along the same lines is I've only had a few major injuries over the course of playing hockey, but they could not have come at a better time because every single time I came back from this injury, whether it was 6 weeks or 6 months of recovery, I was fired up to play when I returned.
Yeah.
So it's this hidden benefit of injuries where a lot of athletes actually feel relieved when they get injured because it's this forced time away from their sport and it's actually managing their burnout and revitalizing their joy for the sport.
Yeah. Man, being grateful for an injury is like, that's like the ninja move in terms of recovery because, right, it's so hard. And especially with injuries that have a longer recovery, you get to this point where you feel really good, but you're not cleared yet. And then patience becomes the thing. And it's like, I feel ready. I'm mentally ready. This doctor's telling me I'm not ready. And having to learn patience, right, is an opportunity. And injuries certainly within reason, right? Injuries that we can come back from
Yeah.
are opportunities to come back to our sport in a better mental and emotional space with more gratitude, with more humility, with more understanding of how special it is to be able to play a sport, whatever level we're at.
Hmm.
Yeah, injury is hard, and the longer you play, the more the numbers are against you. Like you're gonna
Yep.
get hurt.
Yeah,
And sometimes it happens at a really, really, really bad time.
definitely.
And we have to also cope with that. And so, again, coming back to this sense of purpose and meaning and connection, that is one thing that gets us through the sometimes excruciating process of recovery and return to sport.
We've kind of alluded to it already throughout this episode, but let's have a more concrete conversation around core values and
Yeah.
how joy, meaning plays into values and how that can serve us in performance and longevity. Um, do you want to take that away? Start us off here?
Sure. I learned about core values listening to a podcast interview with Steve Kerr talking about when he got hired as the head coach of the Golden State Warriors and how he spent time, and he learned it from Pete Carroll. He went and spent time with the Seahawks during their preseason, and he spent 4 days being around their facility, learning, talking to Pete Carroll about culture building, basically. And so this core values idea came from that. It's not new. Those guys didn't invent it. That was just the first that I had heard of it. And the more I think about it, the more resonant it becomes in terms of intentionally crafting the kind of environment that we want. And the thing that I always come back to is, how do I want my athletes to feel when they enter the space, when they walk in the building, when they step on the field? So, core values are the things that you want to embody and the things that you are not willing to negotiate on. They are, for me, my personal core values are the what am I willing to get fired over? The things that I am not willing to flex on, the things that I'm not willing to give up. And those become the bedrock, the foundation of everything that we do. So I believe that in a sport environment, joy needs to be one of the core values, because they become, the core values become the things that we are trying to infuse into everything that we do. So for Steve Kerr, his core values for the Warriors were mindfulness, competitiveness, joy, compassion. So you can see it in the way that they play basketball. They play a joyful brand of ball. Not so much on defense this year. That's another conversation. But you want your players to feel joyful when they walk in the building. You want them to compete when they're in that environment. You want them to be mindful when they're in that environment. Mindfulness, really, for me, is being in the present moment, aware of what's happening, with the ability to calmly choose what to do next. Okay, so if those are the things that I'm about, then everything I do is a reflection of my connection to those values. So joy is really important. And I would say that joy is a better core value than fun, because joy leads to fun. Cultivating joy, cultivating competitiveness, cultivating mindfulness, those are just those. Other clubs have other values, leads to lots of opportunities to have fun doing what you're doing.
When an athlete can infuse everything they do with joy because it's one of their core values, they're going to be better at their skill acquisition will improve, their participation in activities will improve, and again, like we alluded to earlier, they're not going to experience debilitating anxiety and stress because there is a sense of joy buoying that feeling.
They'll be a better leader. They will be an example. Their motivation and their performance will be more sustainable, will be more resilient. I think it's critical.
Is it worrisome for a coach, parent, but also an athlete if they notice one of their core values is not joy? they put their core values into some other things, like maybe winning, being fit, even like being nice to
Mhm.
others could be important to them, but finding joy every day in their sport isn't a core value. Is that like a red flag going off, or is that maybe more normal than we think?
It's a good question. I don't know if it's a red flag. To me, having winning as your core value is a huge red flag. That is the worst core value of all. I mean, not as bad as like if hate is one of our core values, that's a
Yeah.
pretty big red flag. But from a sports standpoint, winning can't be a core value.
Well,
Core
I
values are things that we control.
mhm.
Winning is not something that we control.
I think from a sports psychology standpoint, winning being a core value is a red flag, but I could see a lot of athletes who make it to the top, either Olympic gold medals or championships, having winning as a core value because that is just such a big motivator. It might not be the healthiest because when things don't go well, that's when they might have a bad temper, have an intense stress response. But yeah, from a sports psychology, trying to create happy, healthy, intense competitors, winning is not, you're right, winning is not a great value for that.
Winning is a goal.
Hmm.
Winning is a great goal to have. But if core values are things that are non-negotiable, if they're things that we are willing to get fired over, if they're things that we're not willing to compromise on, you can see how having winning as a core value is problematic. Because what happens when we don't win?
Yeah.
Which happens a lot. So if you have a goal of winning, which every self-respecting competitor needs to have, not a need, not an obsession, but a goal, then we can say, how do my core values put me in a position to reach that goal?
How do the core values facilitate my process of achieving my goals?
Yes, because core values are about every day. They're
Yeah.
about process. They're about embodiment
S-
of ideals.
So when your core value is winning, which is an outcome that doesn't involve the process, yeah, that's where problems
Yeah, I
can
mean,
can
it just
arise.
it doesn't. Outcomes can't be core values because core values are ways of
Yeah.
being, they're ways of feeling,
Yeah.
they're ways of behaving. They're not a fixed. They're not anything fixed.
So back to joy not being on the list of this athlete's core values.
Mhm.
Are they doomed in any way, either performance or longevity, or what would be your take on a general athlete being seen
No,
like this?
they're not necessarily. Certainly not doomed. I think it depends on what their core values are.
Yeah.
Because you and I, although we agree on a lot of things, are not going to have exactly the same core values. Does that mean that I'm better than you or you're better than me? It doesn't. Core values, first of all, core values need to have an element of morality in them, certainly. But if we are morally right, then my core values and yours don't have to be the same. What they do have to be is really aligned with my own internal process and belief system and with what I'm doing. The core values of a classroom aren't going to be exactly the same as the core values of a hockey team,
Yeah.
which aren't going to be totally the same as the core values of a nonprofit. So they have to be relevant to what we're doing, relevant to the mission, relevant to our purpose, and relevant to who we are, our belief system, what we're trying to achieve. One of those things, certainly things that we're trying to achieve, could certainly be winning.
Yeah.
Of course, we if you're playing a competitive sport and you're not trying to win, you're not in the right place.
Hmm.
Winning is the best feeling. Who doesn't want to win a championship? Who doesn't want to finish their season on a win?
Hmm.
So it's a great thing to aspire towards. So if creating, you hear about it, creating a winning culture. If creating a winning culture, let me backtrack, because a winning culture doesn't necessarily mean you're always going to win. But if winning games is part of your goal set, then you can work backwards and say, what are the things that are really going to help us get there? I would argue that joy is an important component of helping teams create the context and create the conditions inside of which they can work towards winning.
Let's discuss joy in the context of healthy competition, because
Mm-hmm.
I think a lot of people lose joy when competition gets more intense. And someone who jumps out to me as an interesting character in this discussion is Michael Jordan, because
Mm-hmm.
he was just as competitive as it gets. I mean, he would make up stories about his opponents to feel more competitive with them. So maybe he found fun in that, and that's how he found joy in the process of being ultra competitive. But how would you help athletes find more joy in competition, either within their own team? So, for example, competing for a starter and backup role. So,
Mm-hmm.
finding joy in that process, but also just finding joy in the competition between them and their opponents, and having this be in maybe a healthy way if possible.
Yeah. Well, so I think, first of all, there are lots of different ways to be successful. So Jordan's way was his way. Was it healthy? I don't know the guy personally. I would argue that it's probably not the healthiest way for everyone. So I think part of it is finding someone whose methodology inspires me based on what I know about myself. Like their way of cultivating joy, their way of having fun with the process, their way of working towards performance.
Can you provide an example of what this might look like in an athlete?
Sure. Well, let's use the Roger Federer example. Arguably, if not the greatest, among the 3 to 5 greatest male tennis players ever. Got a late start compared to other athletes. Played a lot of sports. Didn't really start focusing on his thing until later. Almost never lost his cool. Almost never came after officials. Widely known to be very gracious, very kind, highly competitive, highly skilled, very dedicated to his craft. That's a different expression of healthy competitiveness than is the Michael Jordan way, which is to literally create fiction about your opponents in order to motivate yourself.
At a certain point, is it true that some athletes can't just decide to be one way or the other? If you have Michael Jordan and Roger Federer on opposite ends of the spectrum of how they facilitate this healthy sense of competitiveness, at a certain point, you can't just will yourself to be like Federer or like Jordan. You are your own person. But I imagine there is some influence of how you try and carry yourself through healthy competition.
Yeah, I think so for sure. And I mean, we're talking in very generalized terms here, right?
Yeah.
Like two of the greatest winners of all time, just going about it in slightly different ways. And I think you could look at, there, of course, are cultural elements to it. There are traumas that different people go through. that play into how they motivate themselves. Um, my favorite basketball player of all time, Larry Bird, was a legendary trash talker, like one of the greatest of all time. Did he go overboard sometimes? I don't know. I was pretty young. But you look at the ways that athletes sort of get up for competition, and it's very different. It's also different. We're talking about individual sport athletes versus team sport athletes. Team sports, there's this collective motivation that's available that isn't really available for individual athletes. So I think you have to look at all of that. And then if I'm an athlete, I have to figure out what resonates with me. Mm-hmm. As long as I'm not abusing other people.
Yeah. Let's say a coach or parent notices their kid is a mini Larry Bird trash talker. So he or she is finding fun in their competitions by maybe belittling the opponent. If that's their way of finding joy in competition, is that something we should try and manage as a parent or coach? Or is that maybe we just monitor it until it seems like it gets out of hand? What's your take on that?
I think it depends, because if it's at the youth level, I think that we are teaching them sportsmanship.
Yeah.
So I think we need to emphasize that and maybe tamp down the trash talk.
Especially when the stakes are low.
Especially when the stakes are low. I think healthy trash talk is okay. What's not okay is to make it personal.
Yeah.
So there's a difference between just talking smack about their game, about beating them, and making it personal, talking about their family, talking about their personal choices, talking about their forms of expression, their identity. That stuff is not okay. And that or making it threatening, that's also not okay. And that kind of stuff, we have to, what are our core values?
Yeah.
If kindness is a core value, if joy is a core value, it's not just my joy.
Yeah.
We're cultivating joy in the environment. So healthy competition involves everybody. And the root of the word to compete, the verb to compete, comes from Latin, and the verb is competere, which means to strive together. And so striving together means, yes, me and my teammates and my coaches, but it also includes the fans, it includes the officials, it includes the opponent. Because without the other team, I don't have anyone to compete with. Without the officials, there's no one to regulate the competition. Mm-hmm. Without the fans, the competition isn't as much fun. Wouldn't we rather play in a full gym than an empty gym? Of course we would. So the joy of the environment also comes from everyone having this sense of collective purpose, not just I'm trying to win, and for me to win, you have to lose.
Yeah.
We all are there to make each other better. The opponent is there to make me better, to force me to elevate my game. So healthy competition to me keeps that in mind. Within that, there are different forms of expressing, right? I mean, okay, we used Michael Jordan and Roger Federer, and what I don't want to have this appear to be is a commentary on race, because it's not. We could easily have used anybody in that situation. So if anyone was put off by that, I apologize. That was not my intention. There are lots of examples of athletes behaving badly.
Mhm. I mean, I've seen this a lot in the hockey world. That's the sport
Yeah.
I follow closest, and there's a lot of slurs being thrown at other
Yep.
players that it's a clear sign of unhealthy competitiveness as opposed to healthy competitiveness. And
Yeah.
within the same sport, I'll see a lot of hockey players. This just like is heartwarming to me when I can see these guys battle it out on the ice. Very intense fighting, checking, competition, yet they are hugging each other after games, taking pictures with each other, meeting to talk about the game afterwards in the stands. That's a sign of healthy competition. It didn't go too far in the moment, but they still might have been competing very intensely.
And that's the difference between trash talk and making it personal.
Yeah,
Because
definitely.
if it's personal, if someone is coming after me personally, they're saying stuff about my family, I'm not shaking their hand after the game. I'm not exchanging jerseys with them.
Yeah, there's a line that is I think it's pretty obvious when you cross it, and
Yeah.
a lot of that is when you get personal. Yeah.
Yeah, and each sport has its issues. Hockey has its problems right now.
Yeah.
And just like basketball has its problems and football has its problems. And unfortunately, a lot of the problems in these sports are centered around personal issues. They're centered around race, they're centered around sexual orientation, they're centered around gender. And so that makes it tricky. And as coaches and athletes and organizers and coaches and fans, it's really on us to change the culture and to take the personal out of it so that we can allow athletes to go be themselves and express, because really what sport provides is an opportunity for people to learn, craft, and express who they are.
How does compassion, curiosity, and humility work into creating an environment that facilitates a sense of joy?
there's a there's a quote from the first season of Ted Lasso that I always come back to, and he himself is quoting Walt Whitman, but be curious, not judgmental. People want to feel seen, they want to feel valued. And so if I am humble enough to know that I don't know anything about this person in front of me, and I'm curious about that because they're my teammate or they're some person, they're a human being, and I can have compassion for them regardless of who they are, that opens up a space for them to feel seen and to feel joyful. Service is really important. Can we truly be of service if we don't have compassion for our fellow human beings, if we don't have humility, if we're not curious about the positive impact that we can have? We're coaches, we're serving the athletes that we're working with. We're parents, we're serving our children. Our jobs as adults working with kids is to put them in positions to grow in healthy ways, is to create safety for them where they can feel included, where they can feel seen, where they can feel safe to take chances, where they can feel supported, where they can feel compassion, where they can experience joy, where they can express their own curiosity in ways that help them become more of who they are.
Is there a specific example of an athlete, parent, or coach that you've seen in sports embody one of these components, compassion, curiosity, or humility, that facilitated a stronger sense of joy and more fun within the sport because of it?
That is a great, great question. The first thing that comes to mind is Simone Biles in the last Olympics. Imagine the courage and the humility that it took to step away on the biggest stage for the sake of her own continued joy and her own mental health. Also, to open a space to give us an opportunity to practice compassion, to demonstrate her own compassion for herself, which is really important, and also for other people and athletes who are going through mental and emotional struggles, and also to open a space of potential joy for her teammates. There were other athletes on the team who ended up winning. Maybe they would have won anyway, but she took herself out of that spotlight and allowed a space of greater joy by setting an example of compassion and humility and courage, and really setting the stage for other athletes to do that. I also think of, sticking with gymnastics, I think of the super courageous women who spoke out about Larry Nasser and the abuse that they went through. That is another opportunity for us to have compassion and for us to be curious about how we can make environments better, safer,
Yeah.
more joyful, less fraught for young athletes.
Those are excellent examples. That Simone Biles one is especially powerful for me because I imagine the compassion and humility that she did show was a result of her curiosity over everything that was going on, that it required a deeper look and work with her sports psychologist
Yep.
to understand how she felt, how she can get back to feeling more joy within the
Mm-hmm.
sport and not feeling like she was.
Yep. And I would say courage is another thing that we should put in with those other things, because even when we're not confident about what's going to happen, we can be courageous. I imagine, knew some level of the blowback,
Mhm.
the reaction that she was going to get from people who, quite frankly, don't know her, don't know anything about the sport, probably watch gymnastics once every 4 years,
Yep.
and are grossly lacking in compassion for these human beings. We have to remember athletes are people. They happen to be really good at what they do. They happen to have dedicated themselves really to doing something that entertains us. Right? We love watching sports. Sports in this country are multi million billion dollar industries, not because sports have some monetary value. It's because we watch them. It's because people pay to go see these athletes perform. So they're entertainers for sure
Mhm.
on some level. So they're out there doing this for us. And the least we can do is treat them like human beings.
I'm curious if there's any credence to the notion of faking fun. So, fake it till you make it is a saying everybody has heard. Is this actually effective, or is there maybe something to this? What would you say to athletes who are trying to fake their way into having fun when they're not?
I mean, good luck is what I would say. No, I don't like fake it till you make it, because to me, that's a passive way of trying to solve a problem.
Easy way out.
It's the easy way out. It's a shortcut. It's looking for someone, some outside force to come and make a change in my own environment, in my own experience. Also, if I'm faking it, I'm not being true to myself. I'm not being authentic and honoring the experience that I'm having and the place that I'm in. So I'm not going to solve anything if I'm not being honest about where I'm at. So if I'm not having fun, I need to be honest about that and be with that. And then get curious. Kobe Bryant also said the most important question that an athlete can ask is why? Why am I not having fun? Why is this thing that used to provide me with so much joy, that used to be an outlet, that used to be a haven for me, why is it not those things anymore? If we start asking questions and we get curious, not just about others, but curious about ourselves, which is sometimes way more scary, then we can begin to orient towards solutions. And if I'm just faking it, then I'm just faking it. And it feels fake to me, which makes it less joyful, more stressful, more of a struggle. And you can see the athletes that are faking it. You can see it because they're not fully engaged, or they're engaged for a minute and then they're not, or they make a mistake and they're like, well, right, shoulder shrug, throw up the hands, heads hang, body language changes. It's evident. So I'm not a believer in faking it till you make it. I'm a believer in being honest about why things the way they are, and then working towards solutions. Maybe I'm going to come up with that. Maybe I need help.
I have a big problem with toxic positivity. I think a lot of people push positivity when it's not possible, and that's going to create more tension. And this fake it till you make it notion is similar to me, where you're trying to be positive when the situation does not call for it. If you're trying to fake like you're having fun when you are simply not having fun, it's going to create more tension in your mind.
I totally agree. I think that's a great analogy, a great connection to make. Yeah, so what do we do? The question is, if I'm not having fun, or if I'm a coach and I can see that my athletes are not having fun, what's the next step?
Yeah, yeah.
Because especially even if joy is not one of my core values, we still want our athletes to be joyful. We want them to have fun, right? I mean, it's like it's definitely something that we're looking for.
Yeah.
So I have to, as a coach, I got to be really honest, including, am I doing this right? How am I contributing? It's not just them. You hear coaches all the time like, pay attention. Why can't you lock in? What do I have to do to get you to pay attention? Like, okay, really, what do you have to do? You're not going to get them to pay attention. You have to invite them. You have to make it worth it for them.
To wrap up this fake it till you make it discussion, I think the only time I would deem this okay is if they're also putting in the work. So, like you said at the top of this, fake it till you make it is an easy way out. It's not putting in the actual work. I think if an athlete is maybe faking it a little bit, like answering their coach, "You excited?" and they're going like, "Oh, yeah, I'm stoked. Let's do this." Whereas they are freaking out inside. I think that is okay if they're also doing the hard work of reinterpreting stressful situations as exciting and doing these reframing methods, becoming aware and mindful. What's your take there?
Yeah, I agree. To me, if you're truly doing the work, then you're not faking it until you make it. You are using that as a tactic to continue moving forward.
Love it. Perfect. Let's get to the action items here. So things that athletes can do right away to facilitate more fun and a sense of joy throughout practices, games, and ultimately their career. The
Okay.
first thing I want to talk about is just reminders. So this goes into reinterpreting your situation, your environment, or maybe your self-talk, reframing that in a way that you can remind yourself of the benefits of having fun to try and get yourself into that position. So understanding that you'll mitigate your stress response, which a lot of people suffer performance wise when that stress response is in overdrive, and making sure you're still maintaining effective focus, resiliency, and commitment to improvement, but still working on finding the joy where you can.
Yeah, I agree. I would say it's not enough to just remind yourself that fun is important,
Hmm.
because I think that that's sort of like, you know, that's like the too obvious answer. I think that reminding yourself, you could like, okay, and fun is important, but I think A more useful statement is, it's supposed to be fun.
Okay.
Why is it not?
Mm.
So there has to be some kind of direction. Curiosity provides direction.
Yeah.
So yes, I mean, of course, I think the first step, right, before taking action is I have to recognize. So there's recognition. Like, I'm not having fun. This isn't joyful. I'm not enjoying it the way I used to. I don't like showing up. I feel dread when I walk into practice. It's supposed to be fun. I think it's supposed to be fun. Why is it not?
And
So
then you open the gate of now I can do something about injecting fun back into this equation.
yep, and that's where then the action items and the tactics come in. But
Okay.
it has to start with awareness, recognition, acceptance, and then curiosity about how to change it. I would say interpretation of stress is a really important one. So learning the skill of recognizing my own stress response, and we talked about it earlier, but recognizing my own stress response and then choosing to interpret whatever stimulus I'm receiving as much as I can. And of course, this isn't like I had a bad interpretation of stress and now I have a good one. Like, you're not just going to listen to me say this and then, oh yeah, cool, now I'm going to go do that. Like, all this stuff takes practice.
Yeah.
Right? Skill acquisition takes time, and mental skill acquisition takes time, just like physical and technical skill acquisition. Have a mindfulness practice, whether that's sitting meditation, whether it's going for a walk, whether it's sitting quietly and reading or listening to music. For me, mindfulness involves movement. So swimming is a great mindfulness activity, because sometimes swimming is kind of boring, swimming back and forth in a pool for an hour. But if I can bring myself really into the moment, stroke by stroke by stroke, that acts as a mindfulness practice. And mindfulness is a useful space in and of itself. It's not like I need to swim to be mindful. Swimming is teaching me to be mindful.
Yeah.
And then that's a space that I can access more readily because I know what it feels like.
Can you help me or maybe clarify for me and the listeners of how mindfulness connects to more joy and fun? Is it the act of becoming aware of how I'm feeling, what I'm thinking, or is there a different piece to it?
It's a minimization of distraction. A lot of the things that make sport environments not fun, I would qualify as distraction.
A lot of that I also think of as chatter, just
Chatter,
overthinking,
noise.
ineffective self-talk. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
So,
mindfulness reduces these factors that reduce joy.
yep. So in that vein, I was listening to a podcast interview with Damian Lillard the other day, and the interviewer asked him, "How do you shut out the noise?" Because there's all this talk, right? Much to the horror of all Portland Trailblazer fans, there's this constant talk about, is he going to stay? Is he going to go? Are they going to trade him? And for some players, that would be a distraction. And so the interviewer was like, how do you shut all that out? And he said, I have a life outside of basketball. I go home, I play with my kids. I talk to my family. I have real friends who don't care that I'm an NBA basketball player. We don't talk about basketball. We talk about life. We talk about back home. We talk about other stuff. So to me, this is the athletic identity piece. I am not just my sport. You are not just your sport. I'm a human being who plays a sport, who has dedicated myself to it. It doesn't mean it's not important. It doesn't mean that it doesn't have deep meaning and value and connection. But it's not all I am.
So if an athlete is thinking they are their sport, it is everything to them, that increases the noise, the overthinking, which saps the joy.
Yeah, and it makes it so that their assessment of their own value is entirely predicated on their performance in this sport and the outcomes that they achieve in the sport, which is too narrow, too fixed, and sort of robs you of joy in other areas of your life, which, if we can cultivate that, makes its way into what we're doing, makes its way into our sport. Another way to cultivate more joy in our lives is to invest in relationships. Human beings are built for connection. We are made to be in community. We are made to be in connection with other human beings and with nature. So invest in that. Invest time, invest effort. You don't have to be friends with everybody. Keep the circle small, keep it tight, keep it intimate, but know who your people are and invest in that.
Which in turn reduces this overly athletic identity of I am my sports. But no, now I'm also the relationships that I have.
Yeah, but I also think it helps us feel supported, and it makes it so that we know that we're not alone in dealing with the stressors that we're dealing with.
Yeah.
And so if we feel not alone, we feel supported, we feel like we have some backup, we have some buffering, it makes us more resilient and able to handle the things that we're confronted with, handle adversity, which then allows us to get back to having fun, to get back to being joyful. It also gives it perspective,
Mm-hmm.
because almost nothing is ever as amazing or as horrible as we interpret it to be. And so investing in close relationships allows us to have some perspective,
Yeah.
because we have people to, maybe even sometimes keep us in check.
Mm-hmm. The last action item I want to discuss, I think a lot of people will enjoy because it's not in our head. It's not changing our self-talk. It's
Mm-hmm.
the physical act of journaling. And
Yes.
the specifics of how to journal to facilitate more fun, I think, are really interesting. So where my head goes here is I'm a big fan of just record data. So if someone is journaling after all their games, all their practices, and they can notice, maybe they just ask themselves on a scale of 1 to 10, how fun was that practice or game?
Mm-hmm.
And they notice I have a lot of 9s and 10s when it was really rough in the middle of it. So I want to share a story from my own playing career in hockey. So as a goalie, a lot of anxiety and stress. That's where my love for the mental side comes from. And I also love overtime. I think some of my favorite memories come from wins in overtime. However, that is the prerequisite that is necessary for that peak moment of joy is intense stress and anxiety at the thought of one mistake loses the game for us. So if I notice that through a journaling practice that I actually love these overtime wins, they are the most fun I ever have in a season. This is increasing my awareness to the point where as I approach this overtime period, and I'm noticing how stressed out I am, how anxious I am, I can look back on all of the journal entries that I wrote down about how this is a necessary component that leads to some of my favorite memories. And that is one way that your increased awareness of where your joy comes from can mitigate and reduce the effects of stress and anxiety that you're feeling before these big moments. What else do you have to add, Aaron, about how journaling can increase joy in athletes?
Well, journaling increases awareness because it's an active self-reflection. It's an active reflection on our experience. And so being able to, first of all, get it out, and the act of writing it down makes it, sort of ingrains it, makes it more likely that we're going to remember, right? That's why they tell you when you're take notes in college and you want to remember stuff for a test, rewrite your notes. So the act of recording it sort of galvanizes it in terms of our memory. And the process of being reflective, the act of being reflective, opens us up in terms of our curiosity.
Yeah.
The other thing that journaling makes me think of, and something that really, really increases joy, and maybe this is where we're going to finish because it's a good thing for people to take away and practice, is actively practicing gratitude. So maybe your journaling practice is you're recording your moments of joy. Maybe your journaling practice is just every day writing down one thing that you're grateful for, one person that you're grateful for, one moment. Because gratitude is not just this abstract phenomenon, it's a skill. It's something that we can cultivate. It's something that we can grow. It's something that we can build, something that we can use.
And by consistently journaling to practice your gratitude, it's easier for athletes in the heat of the moment to find gratitude for something, which can again dampen that stress response that is making them incredibly nervous and panicking.
Yeah, it can help you channel the stress response, right? Because again, energy is just energy.
Yeah.
Your body's just responding. You have some say in what to do with that energy. Yeah, and gratitude can be a journaling practice. It can also be really powerful to thank someone for something. Thank them for the way that they helped you. Thank a teammate for giving you a hand when you got knocked down. Thank your coach for explaining something in a way that you could understand. Thank your coach for showing up on a cold night. I mean, I'm outside a few nights a week with these teams, and it's still winter here. It's cold, and so I love to do it, and it's what I've chosen to do, and it's an act of service, and I don't need anyone to thank me for it, but it feels good.
Hmm.
It cultivates joy. It cultivates connection. It invests in those relationships when we express our gratitude really simply to someone.
And to put this in a more concrete example, I'll share a story of one of my clients who used this practice as a way to be grateful for the pressure that they were under as they were in this championship game. It
Yep.
kind of goes back to pressure as a privilege, but when they can be grateful for the opportunity to succeed on the big stage, it's easier to handle it as opposed to watching it on TV and wishing you had that opportunity. Well, now you do, and you're grateful for it. This is again channeling that energy in a healthier way.
Yeah. And the hardest thing for us is to be grateful for ourselves, because without yourself, without your hard work, your dedication, your commitment, your sacrifice, you wouldn't be in that position. Yes, of course, other people helped you get there, especially if you're playing a team sport. But the common denominator in that is you. And so practicing gratitude for ourselves also makes it more likely that the experience is going to be joyful, which means we're more likely to have fun.
I think some of the athletes with the best mental game are able to do that, which is ironic because a lot of players might look at that as weak by showing gratitude for yourself, but it's the opposite.
Yeah, all of the things that we look at as weak in terms of athletic culture, compassion, empathy, gratitude, humility, kindness, those are all strengths.
Mhm.
And if the point is for it to be joyful, the point is for us to have fun, then don't we owe it to ourselves to do whatever we can to cultivate that?
Let's wrap up the action items here. Give everyone a summary. Number one, recognize if you're not having fun. So be able to have the awareness of, okay, I am severely lacking in joy and fun. That is oftentimes the first step in facilitating more fun in your sport. So engage in this curiosity of where is this coming from, or where is this not coming from?
Yeah, ask why.
Yeah. Number two, training the skill of interpreting your stress response and all the sensations that come with it as helpful. So this is a very popular sports psychology skill of noticing, again, having that awareness of how you're feeling and how a lot of athletes let the rapid heartbeat, the muscle tension, the overthinking sap the joy from the moment, and recognizing all of these effects as normal and actually helpful so that you can think quicker and be quicker. Number 3 is practicing mindfulness as a way to reduce the noise. So this noise being distractions outside of your head and inside of your head. Mindfulness can be practiced at home, at practice, but also in games that will all train your brain to be able to reduce this noise when it's at its highest. And then number 4, journaling. And there's a lot of different ways you can do this. You might find your own method, but 2 methods we went over is having a joy reflection. So cataloging how much fun you're having after each practice and game, and maybe explaining, why was this fun? Why was this not fun? Try to find a pattern in there and then facilitate that common denominator of fun, but also having a gratitude practice of being able to pick out something that you're grateful for, either within yourself or within the context of your sports, that is going to train your mindset to think this way more effectively when it's harder to think that way, and find the fun when it's not easy to find. Do you have anything to add to that list, Aaron, before we wrap up here?
Yeah, just the part about having a life outside of your sport.
Yeah.
Like, allow yourself to be dynamic, invest in other interests, be versatile, give yourself space to feel success, to feel joy in other areas besides that one.
Yeah, and then not as much as writing on your performance this night, so you can let go a little bit more and have a bit more fun.
Yeah, and then relationships. Everything is relationships. Spending time around teams becomes more and more clear that the delineator between teams that succeed and teams that don't is often the quality of the relationships in the room.
Great point. A lot of great points you made today, Aaron, and thank you so much for coming on and talking about this concept of fun within sports, which is really important to me and I think important to a lot of our listeners. So I'm sure they enjoyed what you had to say.
I appreciate the opportunity a lot. If anybody's curious, they want to get a hold of me, you can just go to playfreesport.com and contact me through the website. There's writing, there's more about the work that I do. And I appreciate the opportunity to reach out to people, to talk to you. This has been great. I love connecting with other people in the field, and I look forward to next time.
Me too. All right, Aaron. Thanks again.
Cheers.
Thank you so much for listening. We hope you took something valuable away from this episode. Stay in the loop by following the Sports Psychology of on your go-to podcast platform, and find clips of each episode's best segments on YouTube, as well as Instagram, TikTok, and Twitter. Do you want to take your mental game to the next level? Try out one-on-one sports psychology coaching with me, Gabe Zellico, by visiting my website, zellicoperformance.com. You can book a free intro call where we'll discuss your goals, obstacles to success, and determine if we'd be a good fit to move forward. You can also email me directly at thesportspsychology@gmail.com regarding one-on-one coaching or the podcast. Links to social media, my website, and email are all in the description. Thank you again for listening.